Hey gang, welcome back to another video. So this week I'm tackling a project inspired by a prop that was heavily featured in Andor Season 2. And this build has a bit of everything, from modifying found objects to 3D modeling and printing, laser cutting, and I even threw in a bit of electronics to keep it interesting. So strap in and let's get into building this Andor Season 2 inspired holo projector.
The hardest part of this build was finding an appropriate base. So when this 1960s era floor fan showed up on Facebook Marketplace, I knew I'd found my jumping off point. But before I could start building, I needed to remove the chunky paint and rust. So I disassembled, sanded, and painted it with a bit of primer, and while it was drying I could start on a control box. I got the idea to use an electrical gang box as the control panel for my buddy Brian over at the Smugglers room. But as with most Star Wars projects, it was going to need some greeblies. So I marked and drilled out holes where I'd be mounting a mix of resin-printed parts and found objects, and then could get to attaching them to the box with some hex head screws. Layering parts can help to give your project a more purposeful look, as if there was a legitimate reason for those combinations of parts, which helps to lend a bit of realism to your props. So if you can, I highly suggest you give it a go. Once everything is glued and screwed into the gang box, I can hit it with a coat of primer to unify the pieces, and once it's dry, I'll lay down a metallic silver spray paint as a base for eventual weathering and aging. And since I'm here, I sprayed the rest of the fan parts, since some of these will remain the silver color, and some will get a paint chipping effect, which will need the silver base before the top color is applied. After a bit of dry time, I could get to applying some liquid latex to the parts that will be chipped, starting with these side louvers. I always find it challenging when doing this step because it's important that the chipping looks accidental. So I'm doing my best to keep it random and not repeat the same application as I move from one part to the next. The top of the fan is a bit easier since you could assume that the chipping would be along the edge. So I worked my way around trying to keep it inconsistent until I've made it all the way around the outer edge. After the latex had dried, I gave the parts a coat of their respective paint colors, and when they were dry, I could start peeling off the latex to expose the metal finish below. This part is always really satisfying, since the latex tends to pull up some extra paint with it, which makes the chipping look more jagged and unintentional. It's also just kind of fun to do. Now before I get too much further into this build, let's discuss how I'm going to make this work with this handy schematic. The hologram effect for this prop will be created using an LED display fan, which runs on 12-volt power. I also want to have the classic solid and blinking lights, as well as a projector type glow, and for that I'll be using an ESP32 microcontroller running a bit of code to create all three effects. But in order to have everything running from a single source, I'll need to split the power from the power supply using some terminal blocks. The terminal blocks, shown here in orange, allow multiple wires to be connected to one current source, and are more reliable than using wire nuts. With one set of leads coming from the terminal block providing the full 12-volt power to the fan, the other leads will have their voltage lowered from 12 to 5 volts using a buck converter, before being connected to the voltage in and ground ports of the microcontroller. Then I can connect the individual LED bulbs, again using some terminal blocks, as well as the NeoPixel strip to their defined ports on the controller, and I'm ready to go. Now I know this is a lot to take in. It was a lot for me, so feel free to pause to get a longer look at how everything's wired up. After a quick break, I reassembled the lower part of the fan so that I could get to installing some of the LED lighting. This NeoPixel strip has high bond tape applied to the back of it, and once it's on, it's not going to come off. And because it's on the downward facing edge of the louvers, it should provide a nice glow to the fan body during comms transmissions. Off camera, I placed all of my electronics inside of a gang box and can attach the connection for my strip light and see how it looks. Now I can see that it's running the code, but it's a bit too bright outside for you to see it. So just know that it's flickering away just like the projection of Leia asking Obi-Wan for help. The next thing I wanted to tackle was the top control panel. I drew up a design in Illustrator using the Fuel Connector 3D model from Whitey's Wicked Workshop as the centerpiece and mounting point for my hologram fan. This design was then imported into Fusion 360 and turned into a 3D model, which got sliced into 6pi pieces and sent to my Bambu Lab H2D printer. The large print volume and speed of this machine made quick time of this part of the build. After some assembly with CA glue and a bit of sanding, this control panel was ready for a bit of filler primer. And while that dried, I cut a few of the elements from my design from MDF so that the panels in my design were at all different heights. And after sealing them with clear coat, they were ready for a matte black base layer of paint. The plan is to make these pieces look like they're made of a completely different metal from the rest of the panel. So once the black paint had dried, I grabbed pewter rub and buff and a small nylon brush and got to dry brushing the pieces. I kept working the silver wax across the surface until it had the look I was after, and then I could set them aside and get back to working on the larger section of the control panel. Because I want there to be some continuity between the floor fan and the control panel, this piece will get painted in the same silver paint, and once it's dried, I can glue in the darker MDF panels, and one by one add a variety of greeblies, including hard drive motors, switches, simply juice lids, and wire loom tubing. I'll also take this opportunity to glue in all of my 1-inch acrylic tiles and LED bulb holders. A fun last-minute addition to this build was inspired by a post on Instagram from Graphics Union, where they shared this Gavalox Communications design. This was posted above the Subspace Comm Center on Ferrix in Andor Season 1, and I thought it would be the perfect addition to this portable comm unit. So I recreated the design in Illustrator and made this manufacturer plaque, which got glued and mounted to the control panel. Off camera, I wired up the rest of the electronics based on my schematic, and finally have everything in place to begin the weathering process. I started off with my airbrush for a majority of it, alternating between broad passes and more detailed application, always blotting with a damp rag or damp brush to give it more interest. Whenever I'm weathering, I try to think about how this piece might collect dust and grime and focus my energies into making those areas more interesting. The process of aging can take time, as you tend to wipe away as much paint as you apply, but it's the build-up and layering that makes for good in-universe paint jobs. And once I felt like I had good coverage with the burnt umber paint, I went back in with a lamp black oil paint to give it a greasy look. The oil paint is really easy to manipulate with a brush or rag to create really organic staining to the prop. When the weathering felt right, it was time to install the LED fan. Mrs. Van Oaks made the suggestion to give it fins like a moisture evaporator to hide the aluminum rod in plain sight, since it made more sense to make it look like an antenna, even if the fan was off. So I designed and printed some parts that got painted, paint chipped, and aged like the rest of the prop and installed on this post. All I needed to do now was power it up for its first transmission.
Now, while I know this prop isn't actually in Star Wars, it might be one of my favorite builds to date, because it used a lot of what I know, but also I had to learn a new skill in order to bring my concept to reality. And while I know this isn't a prop you could easily replicate, my hope is that it encourages you to try something outside of your comfort zone the next time you consider a project. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.